Capitalism in the British Empire, as is the case today in the American Empire, constantly requires a need for new sources of raw materials and new markets in which to sell goods. In that context, capitalism is responsible for the spread of imperialism. Karl Marx argued for tying art to the culture that produced it. He believed that the production of art necessarily depended on its immediate context. From that perspective, we can infer that Turner's consistent use of imagery drawn from the struggle between Rome and Carthage expresses what he most deeply felt about the rivalries between the two great imperial commercial powers, Britain and France. The Austrian philosopher Ernst Fischer wrote, "In a decaying society, art, if it is truthful, must also reflect decay. And unless it wants to break faith with its social functions, art must show the world is changeable and help to change it." I agree with Fischer. Turner made an attempt to historicize nature and socialize the landscape. When we look at landscape, we can see the reflective presence of society. Turner felt the pressures of an empire on the brink, teetering on the great precipice before a long drop to the bottom. I think he expressed his insight by transforming the social, economic, and political issues into images. I think he agreed with Wordsworth's philosophy that artists of the Romantic period had to treat things not as they are, but as they appear, not as they exist in themselves, but as they seem to exist in the senses and to the passions. When I look at Snowstorm, I see the senselessness of human violence, of sacrifice, of pain, and the insignificance of those elements in the big picture of life, the world, God, and creation. Why do we fight these senseless wars? Just to stay on top and to reinforce our dominance. I believe that Turner felt the same way. He encoded his social message in his Snowstorm painting. Art is one of the primary bearers of ideology to the masses because of its availability in an innocent form, entertainment. Turner wanted to express his own ideas without having to conform to the ideologies of his patrons. He wrote, "To have no choice but that of the patron is the very fetter upon genius, that every coxcomb wishes to rivet, but choice should even a beggar stand alone. This stand is mine, and shall remain my own." Turner was radical. He did not want anyone telling him how his art should be, because he had his own ideology to promote. He defied the teachings of the picturesque, a direct descendant from Rococo intricacy and the prevailing popular style. He began to show his defiance of the picturesque ideal in his 1798 painting, Buttermere Lake. The rainbow is painted in a natural symmetry, the very aspect that the picturesque turned away from, with its emphasis on roughness and wriggled lines. Turner radically defies the rules of the picturesque he had grown up with. He showed the beginning of another defiance of the picturesque in his 1800 painting, The Fifth Plague of Egypt. Turner created another symmetrical representational form of nature in the swirling vortex sky that would begin to take over many of his paintings. This first hint of the great vortex for which his work became known is most striking in Snowstorm. At last he achieves the structures he had been seeking as most fully expressive of movement, conflict, and change. I believe this expressive structure of change is Turner's method of promoting his ideology. He shows us that the ideals of his society were changing, the ideals of the art world were changing, and he communicated that through the most primitive representation of change, the change of weather. Picture yourself on a brisk and sunny fall day. You're enjoying the day when suddenly the wind picks up, the sky darkens, birds fly in flocks over your head seeking shelter, the leaves blow fiercely. This is the kind of fleeting change I'm talking about. Turner used atmospheric change to convey his ideology that the only constant is change. No empire can last forever. There is evidence that Turner used his artwork to serve political ends. He expressed his feelings for the cause of Greek independence in the two paintings he exhibited in 1816, The Temple of Jupiter Peneleneus Restored and View of the Temple of Jupiter Peneleneus and the island of Aegina, Athens in the distance. The restored temple of Zeus of the United Hellenes can only be an emblem of the national restoration that the picture prophesies. Turner was here a better political prophet than Byron. It was in 1821 that the War of Independence flared up. If Turner prophesied Greek independence, it is safe to say that he had his finger on the pulse of the political landscape in Europe at the beginning of the 19th century. I propose that he painted Snowstorm as a political message to his society, especially the elite, about the trappings of empire, war, and conquest. Turner defied the overwhelming influences upon landscape and history painting. He could never accept the doctrine that landscape ranked inherently below history painting as an art form. In his Royal Academy lectures, he argued that landscape should be more than a background for historical subjects. It should be a subject in its own right. What he was praising in his lectures were not ordinary pastoral landscapes. He admired the landscapes in which the power of landscape challenged the supremacy of history. He defied the compositional norms of history paintings exemplified by Poussin's backgrounds of architectural forms to give the viewer clues about where the subject takes place. His version of history doesn't transport us to a land long ago as we imagine it. Instead, he created a new version and a new vision of history. He saw nature as something in perpetual flux and change, and like the poets of his day, he strove to represent nature in a new way. He wanted to find new ways to represent man's relation to nature. For art to stay in synchrony with its social function, it must reflect decay in a decaying society. It must show the world as ever-changing and cyclical. Turner's work did that. One example is the 9 lines from John Longhorn's Visions of Fancy attached to Turner's Mourning. He shows us that he is concerned with the problem of hope. The lines link mourning, radiant colors, youth, joy, hope, and fancy, while drawing the lessons of decay, dark clouds gathering, and the betrayal of hope. Another example is the paintings of the burning of the Houses of Parliament. He expresses his disillusionment with the trappings of empire. He views Britain as an imperial lamp with dimming light, burning out the last of its fuel. The fallacies of hope and the decline of the European empires are concepts for which Turner sought visual equivalents. He isn't simply painting a large fire, he's sending a message. A third example of Turner's intent to create art reflective of decaying societies is in his 1828 through 1837 painting Regulus. In that painting, Turner used the sun to wipe the Carthaginians off the face of the earth and, in effect, render the viewer blind, just as Regulus, the tortured Roman captive, was blinded. They disappear before our eyes as we try to see them. Turner implied that the Carthaginians, like all once powerful empires, had been stricken from our sight, from the earth, and from existence. I suggest that in Snowstorm, Turner analogizes the great conqueror Hannibal's gradual rise to the summit of the Alps and his descent into the Italian plains with the gradual rise and approaching decline in the cycle of all great empires. Turner represents time and space so that it displaces the traditional linear time of conventional history with his own temporalized space. In Snowstorm, the black jaws of a storm which at once enclosed the sun and opened the view to the sunlit plains of Italy prefigure ultimate disaster for Hannibal, even as the sunlight treacherously promises success. Turner saw the beginning of the end for the mercantile British Empire. He expressed his disillusionment with temporal power and warned viewers of his paintings with visual expressions of change and the cyclical nature of empires. My thesis here has been that Turner's painting, Snowstorm, Hannibal Crossing the Alps, invites us to condemn the ideology that war and conquest are heroic and glorious. The politics and poetry of his day influenced his beliefs, and his painting serves as a warning to his society about the transient trappings of empire, conquest, and domination.